I just want to discuss now some of the things that Greg and I discussed on the phone call that I had with him when I was in Mexico 3 months ago. And I made that decision. Okay, we're gonna do the ecological approach. We're gonna try it. I had a phone call with Greg, and Greg told me about what his analyzing the problem of fighting is how he described it. So he just looks at fighting as a problem to be solved, just like any athlete could look at any sport as a problem to be solved. Okay, so he says all fighting has the same central problem, the movement problem. And that's basically just saying that you're never going to fight someone who's not moving. You're always going to have someone, when you're striking with someone, you're always going to have someone who's bobbing and weaving, trying to move their feet, stay out of striking range, and then come into range and strike you and get back out of striking range again. In grappling, you're never just going to be able to apply an armbar on someone. They're going to be keeping their arms tight to their body. They're going to be trying to also, break your arms. So there's always going to be the problem of movement in combat. What's the solution? The solution is immobilizing the body, and that will allow an opportunity to actually cause damage to someone, whether it's by submission or by striking. He says the foundation of all engagements in Jiu Jitsu, maintaining connections and managing the distance. So you're always going to try to maintain connections with your partner. If you don't have connections with your partner, you can't control them. And managing the distance, preventing them from essentially getting to a position where they can immobilize you and start to isolate your limbs. He talks about he talks about these 4 different tasks, I guess you could describe them as. There's complex and continuous tasks, which would be like an action, like a guard pass, a big score. Okay, these require lots of steps. A serial task where a serial task is like where there are certain steps required that need to happen for a technique to work. There are discrete motions. So breaking mechanics, finishing an armbar, finishing a heel hook, finishing a strangle, etc. So dialing in small mechanics. And then there's structural destabilization. And he always talks about this in his videos. You can go on YouTube and watch his videos. He actually puts up his class breakdowns on YouTube, kind of like I do, but he does a much better job with his video editing and whatnot. And he talks about the structural destabilization coming in 2 forms: breaking mechanics and kazushi, off balancing someone. And these are kind of like the four main pieces to controlling someone in jiu-jitsu, immobilizing someone, performing a task on someone. All right, he talks about 3 macro situations. So this is how he essentially categorizes the positions in jiu-jitsu. It's very, very vague, by the way, right? You could be as vague as or as specific as you'd like in this situation, but he talks about 3 macro situations. There's the standing situation, right? Standing versus standing. There's guard top versus bottom situation, and then there's pinning top versus bottom situation. So you can see how vague these terms are. Standing situation, obviously 2 people standing. Guard top versus bottom could be half guard, could be open guard, could be De La Hiva, etc. And pinning top versus bottom could be any chest-to-chest position, north-south, mount. He even refers to rear mount as a pinning situation, just like Danaher does as well. He also talks about turtle as a pinning situation. He also discussed to me, because I had some questions about, well, how would you teach a standing lesson using the ecological approach? And he gave me a couple of ideas. So he said that when he teaches standing, there's kind of 2 main fears that every athlete will have: the fear of falling and the fear of engagement. So especially with beginners, you ask 2 white belts to start wrestling each other, they'll kind of like do this weird hand slappy thing. I mean, that is wrestling, but they'll almost be afraid to get too close because they don't want the other person to shoot in on them, and they're very, very they're afraid to engage almost, because they're not as confident in their techniques. They're not as confident in the situations that can come up. And so you see them play this weird sort of game of patty cake. And there's also a fear of falling. So these 2 main fears: fear of falling, fear of engagement. Funny thing is, I don't think Greg talks about teaching break falls or I don't think he's an advocate for teaching break falls. Whereas You take a guy like Jigoro Kano, the creator of judo, he put a lot of emphasis on beginners learning how to break fall. And I do too. I think it's important that you know how to fall safely. Greg talks about teaching the standing situation in 4 different situations, or 4 different engagements, as he calls it: the single leg, the front headlock, the body lock, and the double unders. So some examples that you might have of training in this way, and I use this with kids all the time. I say, okay, start in a single leg. Now just hold the single leg for the whole round. So it's a minute round. Your job is just to hold the single leg. The other person's job is to free themselves with the single leg. Okay, ready? Go. Right? Then the next round, you could say, okay, now your job is to put your partner's hands or butt on the floor. And if you do that, just let them stand back up again. Other person, try and clear the single leg. Go. Or you could even make a constraint to the game and say, okay, we're going to start in a single leg. Now I want you to find a way to get to your partner's back or go to a double leg, right? So you're giving them really specific games within these engagements. Front headlock, for example, you could start with a front headlock and say, okay, attacker, your goal is to either get a submission or go behind your partner or take them down. Go. Other person's job is to just escape, right? You could build games around all of these positions, double underhooks. You could even build a game around an over-under. I remember there was a grappling promotion called Fila, and I think in an overtime scenario, they would actually make the athlete start in an over-under position and with locked hands, and the athlete who unlocked their hands first loses. This is another thing you could do. This is like a mini game within itself, just to kind of work the Greco-Roman stand-up style, and you could make a game around that, right? So very interesting outlook, and that was sort of Greg's notes that he gave me before I started the ecological approach. So I just wanted to share those with you guys.